The Spin-off Podcast Network.
Are you making the most of your KiwiSaver investment? Generate is an award-winning KiwiSaver provider with a track record of strong long-term performance. Making a smart decision now could add tens of thousands of dollars by the time you reach retirement. Book a no-obligation chat with a Generate KiwiSaver advisor today at generatekiwisaver.co.nz/get-advice. A copy of the product disclosure statement is available at generatekiwisaver.co.nz. The issuer of the scheme is Generate Investment Management Limited, and of course, past performance does not guarantee future returns.
I'm Toby Manhire, and this is Juggernaut, the story of the Fourth Labour Government, a podcast in 6 parts.
Doesn't give my opponents much time to run up to an election, does it?
This nation is at risk.
What do you think you're up to now, you perverted little liar?
I could smell the uranium on it as you lean towards it.
Most radical overhaul in the history of New Zealand's administration.
Juggernaut, the story of the Fourth Labour Government, made with the support of New Zealand On Air. Listen now on the Spin-off or wherever you get your podcasts.
Oh my God. I was going to clarify that and we can't put that back.
I just piloted that one into the ground.
Tēnā koutou katoa, this has gone by lunchtime. It's April 13 in the year 2022. Two very special guests with me here today. Ben Thomas.
Kia ora.
And Annabelle Lee Mather.
Kia ora. Are we really guests?
Well, what I'd like to
do is
just...
Are we manuhiri tuarangi or just like fairly local?
Yeah, I think you're probably tangata whenua.
No.
Toby's just trying to keep us at arm's length to avoid being hurt again after we were on Tova's show.
It was quite hurtful.
Oh my God, that was such a sexy little encounter with Tova the other morning, wasn't it?
I'm not
we
saying...
just gave her 7 minutes of like our best stuff.
Okay, that's fine. That's fine. I mean, it's fine. It's fine. You can do what you like. Yeah.
We were thinking about you, Toby.
Men and women.
You know.
Yeah, about how much better it was without you.
Kia ora te ai here.
Kia ora, Toby.
We're in a new studio, which is pretty cool. How's it going so far?
It's drenched in sunlight and there's a plant over there. Couldn't be
beautiful better. Monstera.
We do actually have natural light coming into the studio for the first time since we used to be in that rickety old attic down on Custom Street. Do you remember that?
I do, yeah.
Oh, that's right. And this one doesn't have traffic noise either, so it's the best of both worlds.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. Hey, we're going to talk today about things like Ukraine, about things like fair pay agreements, about things like Ashley Bloomfield. Louisa Wall's still around, and we'll have a word from Moana Jackson. Let's kick off by saying thanks to members, which is important because we really love Spin-off members for helping us continue this podcast, which is almost as good as listening to Ben and Annabelle.
If it wasn't for the members, we wouldn't have the beautiful dappled sunlight filtering through the studio right now.
The monstera would be as dead as the ones at my house.
It'd be like the peace lily that lives in my lounge or dies in my lounge.
Ukraine. This morning at 8 a.m, the Hercules C-130 headed off for its 5-day trip to Europe. This is a 1969 aircraft, I kid you not. Lovely aircraft, though. But it is a sort of, Ben, it's a sort of step up. It's a step change in terms of New Zealand's support for the Ukrainian response to the invasion from Russia. I don't want to be over dramatic about it. It's not like we're at war per se, but it is, and together with that contribution, there's 58 or something personnel going. Only a few of them are on the Herc itself. And we've also committed some millions of dollars to be funneled via the UK for purchasing lethal aid, as they call it, for purchasing weapons. So we're in there. It's different.
Can I just say my main concern is like some kid's going to run outside with a pea shooter or a slingshot and shoot our Hercules out of the sky.
It's we're getting new Hercs, aren't we? We've got them on order, I think. But these C-130s, 1969, that's going back a bit.
It is.
Have you been on one of those planes before?
I haven't.
Ben?
No, I never got to go on any junkets. This was one of the great, inequalities. I was pressing for the Attorney General, who was the Minister of Treaty of Waitangi negotiations. I've been to many crumbling marae in all sorts of parts of New Zealand.
Probably ridden a horse somewhere.
Seen a lot of horses. They had the DPS sort of swerve out of the way of them. But yeah, whereas my colleagues who are in the Prime Minister's office or the Foreign Affairs Minister's office, would come back with stories of being sort of born in motorcades, with armed police outriders on motorcycles sweeping through the capital cities. And, but, it's fine. Gisborne's fine. It's nice.
This is a conversation about the geopolitical consequences of New Zealand's contribution to the war underway in Ukraine.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah, I'm just saying I've never been on a hit.
It's a shift, isn't it? It's a shift in the contribution.
Yeah, it is. I mean, look, in terms of will this be the decisive moment that turns the tide of the conflict? Probably not.
Probably not.
Sending 50 people over there, or, I assume they'll be helping with intelligence and those sorts of things, I guess. I don't know. But obviously not boots on the ground, outside forces, that's sort of the red line which the West can't cross in Ukraine. It's basically going over the border from Poland or any of the other neighbouring countries and actually being in the Ukraine physically or sort of enforcing a no-fly zone, that kind of thing. Because that widens the conflict, which is already extremely ugly on a regional level, into, people keep saying World War III, but at any rate, a war with significant potential downside, to say the least, for the world. It is a ramping up of commitments. There was criticism, internationally, if you count the Wall Street Journal as international, that New Zealand wasn't sort of really pulling its weight early on. We're very slow to enact sanctions because of this clinging to the idea of, the UN as the appropriate body to give sanctions. But of course, Russia being on the Security Council can veto that. So one of these ironies that our so-called independent foreign policy means that in theory, any of our stances can be vetoed by monstrous world powers like Russia and China. So this is a step up, particularly the commitment of what they call lethal aid weapons, essentially, or money for weapons. Really interesting. Penny Henare, who has quite loose discipline around sort of collective cabinet responsibility, and mentioned that he had sought permission from cabinet to actually have some of our weapons sent over, Javelin anti-tank missiles. Which might have just been a way of bragging that the New Zealand military actually had anti-tank missiles.
I know.
I think that's going back a bit, didn't I? I think he also said that wasn't put to cabinet on Monday.
Not on Monday, no. It had previously been sort of raised, and this seems like a better solution. Just give them money; they can get it from the sort of interested powers who have production lines of this stuff, as opposed to getting rid of our scarce but newly discovered anti-tank defences.
I mean, our contributions to anything on this scale is always going to be symbolic, isn't it? And that was underlined at the post-cabinet press conference on Monday, Annabelle, when Jacinda Ardern, the Prime Minister, and the Chief Defence Force just were asked about those Javelin missiles, and it was revealed that probably if we had provided those Javelin missiles, which are expiring quite quickly, so in a way it's kind of like, take the stuff, but that they would have probably been used up in about 5 minutes in that conflict. And so our contributions are inherently symbolic. And I guess the one that we haven't pulled yet is whether or not to expel the ambassador. The chief argument against being, it seems, that would provide a tit for tat. The quid pro quo from that would be that our people in Moscow would then be expelled almost inevitably, and that would lose us that kind of ability to provide consular support for people in Russia. Do you think that that's a step that we should be taking? Is there anything else we can do? Does it matter?
As someone who's deeply opposed to war, I think, whether it's sending javelins or providing lethal aid is something that I think is not the right thing.
Step too far.
A step too far.
Yeah.
I think it would have been better to have kicked out the Russian ambassador. Obviously, we're under pressure from our allies to look like we're ponying up and joining the fight, but I think there's far more constructive ways that we could have done that, and I think that kicking out the Russian ambassador rather than chipping in for weapons would have been a far more principled and helpful approach, because by definition, weapons are going to harm and, aid is going to aid. So I think we would have been better off providing stronger support for refugees, rehoming people, humanitarian efforts. So I think it's I'm sad that this is the stance that New Zealand is taking.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because of that kind of incremental approach, we've taken one little step forward, a little inching further bit by bit. There hasn't quite been that when is the point at which it changes its shape materially, insofar as even in previous conflicts when we've sent even peacekeeping troops or support troops, there's been an argument that this is an engagement in a war that is too far. Whereas this one, it doesn't. I mean, I may have missed it, but I don't think I've seen a very strong pushback against this change.
The thing too is, if we'd kicked out the Russian ambassador, like that sends a message that we're serious. And even if our people have got kicked out of Russia, like you're in Europe, like you're not too far from another type of consulate, but $7.5 million of arms, it's more than some treaty settlements.
I don't know how many New Zealanders are currently in Moscow and need consular support. I would have thought that, ending diplomatic ties with Russia, in terms of, embassy exchanges was probably, symbolically sort of the right thing to do. They won't need to be on hand to sort of organise Jacinda Ardern's state visit because she's been blacklisted from Russia along with all the other MPs in New Zealand. Nobody will have to choose the menu. The consular staff probably don't have a lot to do over there. Where this becomes an issue, I think there's two things there. The first is, in terms of New Zealand's contribution to a war, we've heard sort of Jacinda Ardern, David Seymour, a few politicians refusing to be drawn on the idea of whether Vladimir Putin is a war criminal. And that sort of maintains this sort of legal fiction that international law is a real thing, that, you don't want to prejudice Vladimir Putin's right to a fair trial at The Hague. Vladimir Putin will never be at The Hague. There will never be a trial. If there was a trial, whatever the, International Criminal Court judges who were there, they wouldn't be influenced by, the stray off the cuff remarks of New Zealand politicians. This is a moral thing. This is the only court here is the court of public opinion. It can't issue binding verdicts, no matter how bad public opinion is. Vladimir Putin will not withdraw from Russia, from Ukraine, and so this is really just it's about stating New Zealand's values, given the sort of horrors that we're hearing out of Ukraine right now.
But equally, if you're going to apply it to one, then you kind of have to apply it to all. So then we're going to start calling out Tony Blair and George Bush and all of those ones too. I guess, war criminals, please put your hands up. Yeah.
What's going on in Yemen, what's happening in Syria, there's lots of examples that we could cite. On that West point Papua. About the international law, of course you're right that these things, there aren't the same processes that we find in domestic jurisdictions. On the other hand, if you want to afford integrity to those institutions in the future, there's still some responsibility on statespeople not to go around and sort of make those determinations.
To follow due process.
I mean, they have said that war crimes are being committed.
Yeah.
And, I'm not going to give them too much grief for stopping short of starting to announce who are war criminals on the stage. Shall we talk about fair pay agreements? It's quite a big part of the Labour program. The previous Labour-led government was criticised quite a lot for having a lot of working groups, for not getting a whole lot of stuff done. There was the delivery promises. There was Kiwi Build. There was, of course, the small matter of a pandemic that brushed everything else to one side. But when we're looking for major legislative changes that are enacted under this Labour majority government, I don't think you can go a lot further than the fair pay agreements. legislation, which has just passed its first reading in the House and will go to select committee. And it essentially creates a new system for negotiating industry-wide pay agreements. So far excludes contractors, though that's just because that's complicated and they want to include that in the future so that it can take in, for example, Uber drivers or couriers or so on.
Podcast hosts.
But yes, well, as a basic, it'll be interesting to see whether the political podcast sector is able to. In order to do that, we need to get either 1,000 of our members, the union responsible for us need to get 1,000 of our members, or 10% of our membership, which might be more achievable than 1,000. I haven't done the maths on it. And then what we would do is I think the union would then go to the Employment Relations Authority, and then they would engage a representative from businesses. Business NZ were involved at an early stage, but they have withdrawn and they're not supporting it, and they're neither are the EMA, and so there is opposition there. But basically then we would enter a mediation process, I think, and try and negotiate some floor rules, some floor payment bases for political podcast contributors. And then that would go to be signed off. What's the word I'm looking for? Approved, endorsed,
sealed,
ratified, maybe one of those words by the people involved.
Sealed in wax by Michael Wood, the employment relation, the workplace.
If the political podcasters couldn't come to an agreement with the political podcast bosses, the overlords of political podcast minions, if we couldn't do that, then it would, after a few, if that fails, then it goes to the Employment Relations Authority, who I think, if I had it right in saying, are empowered to set the terms, to make a call themselves.
Do we get to have a hikoi at any point?
Oh, there's going to be a hikoi.
Cool.
Now, you can't, that's an interesting point. So I think you're not allowed to strike in support of a fair pay agreement.
Yes, okay.
So that's,
once you're in that process.
Yeah, well, that's off the table. You can't strike to support the bargaining of a fair pay agreement. So it's different from a collective agreement signed between a union and an employer for that reason, or a multi-employer collective agreement, which is signed between either one or many unions with one or many employers.
Of which haven't really borne fruit as an idea. So
they haven't taken off because they were purely voluntary. And so there was, so in the old, this is actually a bit of an effort to wind back time a bit.
Takes back 30 years, will you, Ben?
Oh, look, let's go back hundreds.
Let's go back 100,000 years.
Originally, unions were outlawed.
Can you do some mood music on this, Bells? Just a little kind of, I feel like a proper podcast. We would layer over some kind of antique Baroque cello.
In the 19th century, unions were illegal, right? And the basis for that was saying they're a cartel. So they basically sort of said, in the same way that all of the petrol companies get together and determine their prices and gouge the public, they looked at all these sort of straggly, emphysemic miners, dying on the job, losing limbs, and they were like, it's the same. It's, they're using their market power to sort of, crush these like little employers. So union activity was illegal. In New Zealand, that was changed. There was a very centralized sort of system of negotiation between unions and employers, and it would be arbitrated by the government. That was the old arbitration system. And that's, there were various sort of variations on that, but essentially before, leading up to the 80s and in parts of the 80s, there were, it was essentially, it wasn't compulsory unionism, but close enough. And the union negotiated pretty much the pay across sectors. Unions spent a lot of time arguing amongst each other about which, who got control of which sector, because that meant more income for them. And everything was sort of decided centrally. Well, my first job out of university was with the Employers and Manufacturers Association up in Auckland. And it had been hit hard sort of in the subsequent decades by the deregulation of the employment market. And you'd have a lot of these grizzlies sort of, guys who would lament the days when, it was just an easy life all year. And then you'd go down to Wellington for a month, sit across the table from the unions, unionists thump the tables, threaten each other, yell, drink heavily into the night every day, and then at the end of it, you'd come out with a collective agreement for the next year, and then you go back to wherever.
So those bosses were at that time bemoaning the end of those award rounds.
Yeah, well, of course, because essentially all of these employer groups are the same as the unions. It was essentially compulsory to be part of them, and so
but surely they were the voices that were fighting hard, lobbying hard for the removal of those particular structures.
No, that was more people like the Business Roundtable, so the actual sort of employers and their, the business owners, as opposed to the sort of groups that represented them. This was a big part of the sort of reforms of the 80s, was getting rid of these sort of vested interest groups. Now, there was in 1991, all of this was just stripped away. The Employment Contracts Act came in, and essentially you went much more back to that sort of 19th century sort of situation, where it was deemed that an employer and an employee were just two people who could come to an agreement with each other.
Just two humans.
Just two humans.
Just a couple of ordinary pals.
Pals hanging out.
Yeah. Just equals. Just a meeting of equals.
Chatting over how they would like their individual, bespoke, tailored agreement to work out.
Yeah.
Just like a little bit of backyard cricket between Dennis Lilly and a toddler.
Yeah. Beautiful thing.
And depending on who you listen to, so the union membership, collective agreements, just really fell away.
Union membership collapsed.
Yep, union membership collapsed. Under the Employment Contracts Act, you could have extremely flexible arrangements. So, I'm hiring my podcast co-hosts. I'm putting them each on a month-long contract. At the end of the month, we'll review it again. You could do this for any job. That was seen as perfectly sort of reasonable. They made our employment markets extremely flexible, as the economists say. But
like a yoga instructor.
Yeah. But it took the
downward dog hard.
The Labour government sort of swung the pendulum back a little bit when Helen Clark's government came into office. They instituted this thing called
They'd already swung the pendulum hard the other way. It's worth pointing out, under Douglas, that was then picked up subsequently under the national government with the Employment Contracts Act.
Yeah, well,
it's just true, Ben.
It's the Employment Contracts Act was a real step change, like an enormous one. And the Clark government sort of kept the Employment Contracts Act, renamed it the Employment Relations Act, and added in a few more protections like good faith bargaining. They gave unions more powers. You could no longer bar unionists from your workplace from recruiting members, things like that. And they removed the sort of ability to make everything fixed term agreements. They said it is a relationship. It's an ongoing relationship. If you want to make something, one of these extremely arbitrary, you can't have arbitrary fixed terms. It's got to have a decent reason. That put the kibosh on some of the worst excesses of that. But employers still tried to find ways around it. 0-hour contracts were a big thing under the previous national government, and Michael Woodhouse, who was the Workplace Relations Minister, introduced legislation to ban those after some very good work from the Unite Union, who I think we're next to now.
Right there.
We're next to the Unite Union now.
Sign. Yeah,
exciting. Maybe that's what I was thinking about. Maybe it was subliminal advertising. So sorry, with all of that sort of like background, this is probably the biggest change since the Employment Contracts Act, because this will basically reinstate essentially, compulsory bargaining within particular sectors and centralised sort of wage setting. So the arguments for that business groups are making against that is that the circumstances of different employers vary greatly. You can't be prescriptive about these things. You don't want somebody in Invercargill being paid the same as somebody in Auckland. They have very different costs.
I'm pretty sure the Act allows that to be.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. These things will all be able to be negotiated.
So that someone,
Which leads to the second objection, which is that these things will become extremely complex. So Eric Crampton, the New Zealand Initiative economist, I think on Twitter the other day was bringing up an example of one of these centralised contracts in Australia, where, if you've got to label every employee in terms of what they're being paid. So, what one person who's working at a bar, they can collect glasses from tables, but they can't serve a drink at the bar because that's a different employee categorization, has a slightly different pay rate. So, there is an argument about the complexity that will be involved in there, both in the negotiations, which could go on for a long time, be very difficult to manage, and then complexity for employers, applying those contracts. One of the other employers who may have had nothing to do with the actual negotiations, just
sure. One of the other criticisms that was made was that that it might lift wages, which was great. I'm pretty sure that's not a bug. That's a feature.
Honestly, Tory MPs, right? Like they're just not even taking it seriously anymore. In the old days, you just say this is going to decrease flexibility for employees.
You mentioned Australia, and it's worth pointing out that the template for this legislation is very much legislation that's been in place in Australia, I think, since the last Labor government. Annabelle, one of the other things that I think is worth noting is that it's not going to create this incredible bursting of a dam and everybody's going to be doing it. There's a limit. I think it's 4 or 5 that can be done in a year. There's a public interest test that could kick in. And so it's not like all of a sudden there's going to be, it's going to be like 1970s level of people in pay negotiations and so on. But Ben's right, isn't it? It is a big, especially for a Labor government, for industrial law, this is a big deal.
It is, and it has the ability, if it works well, to solve a number of issues that we're facing as a country. Like the working poor is a real problem for us. It's not that we have, it's not that people aren't working hard. When you hear this narrative around, a meritocracy, and if people work hard, they can live good lives, and we've got to get people, out of benefits and lift their incomes. And yet there's this desire, the right rails against lifting minimum wages and all of that sort of stuff. And then upset about the brain drain to Australia. People are going to Australia because they earn better incomes there. So we desperately need to raise our low-wage economy, and in doing so we can address a whole raft of social issues, health, housing, education, all of that sort of stuff. So I think it'll probably end up being the most important thing that Labor does this term.
Yeah, it's certainly the most significant legislation that they're currently putting through. So the justification for it, the sort of examples that they'll probably be starting off with, first of all, to reduce the complexity of the process, but also because these are essentially the sort of people that they're targeting, like, for instance, the bus companies in Wellington, or cleaners,
supermarket workers,
where you've got a number of big employers who employ, probably the majority of the workforce, and where they compete against each other, and this is why the buses and cleaners, the way that they primarily compete is on price, and the way that they can compete on price is by driving down wages. So this makes it very hard for unions to get in and sort of bargain up the wages, because if we've seen that NZ Bus down in Wellington actually pays higher wages and has better benefits than the other companies that tender for the same public transport contracts down there. But what that means is that New Zealand Bus have become less competitive over time, and so have been losing those contracts. So you can get the Unite Union in. They're not the union in that area, but you can get them in. They can organise the workplace. They can demand better contracts, and all that means is that now this business is not competitive with its competitor, which will sweep up all of the contracts. And so fair pay agreements are a way of, the stated intention is to stop what they call a race to the bottom, predicated on basically driving down your wage costs, and wage costs are income for if you're an employee. And supermarket workers, obviously, because there's 2 to 3 main employers in the country. So that's quite an easy one to look at.
They're doing it tough, those supermarket companies.
It seems to me that the companies it's going to hurt are the ones that can actually really afford to be seriously hurt.
Or it will hurt them equally, which that's sort of the mechanism at play, is that if it raises the costs, it raises the costs for all of them except the ones who are already paying higher wages, which in a market economy is usually none of them because they have to compete on wages.
This is a non-controversial and substantial piece of legislation, and I think it's worth mentioning Michael Wood, not to be confused with Michael Woodhouse, who you alluded to a moment ago, who has been one of the most effective ministers. There was the bridge bike path stuff was a slight blot on his record, but apart from that, he's had to oversee the introduction of the light rail in Auckland, which we'll talk about in pods to come. But in terms of this and in his other, he's one of the kind of top shelf of, having been there a relatively short time, one of the better performers in cabinet, isn't he?
Yeah, and look, a guy like Michael Wood really shows the advantage of getting experience in there. He's only he's
a former union negotiator,
second-term MP, but he spent a lot of time in the union movement and as a local councillor. So most of the big public transport things most of the big transport issues he's dealing with are in Auckland, and he knows that employment space extremely well. So the other thing is that just on a personal level, he's completely unruffleable. And, that you can't underestimate the importance of that for a minister, who has to go in and talk about how you're building a $500 million bike bridge and then a few months later appear on TV and say, actually, you're not. And it's cost $51 million so far, but that's how things are. And just not break a sweat, not change your expression. He's a huge asset for the government. And it does show up, the problems that this government's had with the sort of paucity of talent, putting inexperienced people who don't know the portfolios into areas requiring major change. We saw that with mental health. We saw that with, the consumer finance legislation. We see it with a lot of things that they do. So whether this is sort of perfect legislation or not, I think there will be a lot of hiccups in the initial implementation. And one thing that I'm really puzzled by is the putting the Employment Relations Authority in as the final decider of contractual terms, in the event that agreement can't be reached. The Employment Relations Authority is essentially a group of former academics, unionists, employment lawyers. They're competent at their jobs, but that's generally mediating disputes about personal grievances or unfair firings. They're not industry experts. It really, I would have thought that you would have a specialist body for that rather than just somebody on about sort of $100,000 a year.
This has gone by lunchtime. We will be back in a moment.
Talofa lava. I'm Madeline Chapman, editor at The Spin-Off. If you have the means, consider supporting our high-quality journalism by becoming a Spin-Off member. Sign up now at thespinoff.co.nz/donate.
Are you curious about how business can be better? I'm Simon Pound, and I host Business is Boring, a podcast where I kōrero with some of the most interesting people in entrepreneurship, commerce, and making things happen. Tune in to Business is Boring every Tuesday, brought to you by the Spin-Off Podcast Network in partnership with Spark Business Lab.
Kia ora, I'm Duncan Grieve, founder of The Spin-Off. You can help us keep all of The Spin-Off's award-winning journalism free for everybody by becoming a member today at thespinoff.co.nz/donate.
Annabelle?
Yes.
One current Labour MP who I'm not picking for a cabinet post in the near future is Louisa Wall. I don't know if you agree with that. She has been provided with a new role, a Pacific Gender Equality Ambassador, which...
a job that definitely exists.
A job that will exist in the near future. But having said that, I mean, we talked about Louisa Wall on the last podcast, and I wasn't necessarily expecting to talk about her again on this podcast, but here she is. And there was some talk about was this role created to keep her quiet? Well, if that was the idea, it didn't work because she gave two, fairly explosive interviews, one with Audrey Young in the Herald, the other with Jack Tame on Q&A, in which she kind of did not hold back in revealing her sense of being let down, her sense of being betrayed, her sense of being sidelined by Jacinda Ardern and others in the Labour leadership. I'm sort of beginning to wonder whether in the new role she will sort of suddenly come up with these extended analogies to describe any factor in the world of Pacific gender equality to describe, well, I can tell you one thing that is, what do you make of it all? Has she gone too far in doing that? Is it just that's what you reap what you sow? What do you think?
I don't think so. I think that, someone who served as long as she has, that she's entitled to tell her own story about her time as an MP. I actually disagreed that it was no holds barred and that she...
there were holds barred.
I actually thought that she came across as fairly reasonable. She said that Jacinda had the right to pick her own cabinet and she wasn't in it, and, that Jack would have to ask Jacinda why. I thought, I actually think it's a mark of her mana that despite the way she was sidelined, that instead of becoming a destructive, disruptive MP who leaked against her party and caused all sorts of trouble, she actually knuckled down and continued to do a really good job and got some important pieces of legislation across the line. I think she truly is a kaupapa-driven person, and it was gross seeing the Mike Williams and that come out of the woodwork and start slamming her. Like, she's entitled to be able to tell her story and share her whakaaro, and I don't think it was disrespectful or rude. I don't think she was nasty. I thought that she was just telling the truth from her perspective.
Ben, you made the point in a column you wrote that, politics is better for having people like Louisa Wall. If everyone was like Louisa Wall, the system wouldn't work. If caucuses were everyone was like Louisa Wall. But shouldn't we have a system where individuals like Louisa Wall, we discussed this before, whose achievements are formidable, her legislative achievements are better than, a dozen other MPs combined over longer careers.
I think other people as a strategy might have chosen to make her a minister for that reason, so that, she does come under some collective responsibility and there's some more structure and control around her. Like, to me, that would have been the smarter thing to do, would be to keep her close in your camp and under the, ministerial responsibilities, as opposed to leaving her out like that. And I think the fact that she just got on with the mahi is incredible, really.
Yeah, I thought she could have been a bit more discreet. There's no point relitigating all of this stuff as you're on your way out the door. In terms of having just talked about employment relationships, an MP, of course, is not an employment relationship. You're an elected official. That means that when you leave your job, even if you come to some kind of sort of handshake arrangement about, being set up with a nice new position, one that certainly did not used to exist. The MFAT were never sort of sitting around thinking, well, we need a Pacific gender ambassador. I wonder, should we advertise? What should we do there? Should we get on Seek? Should we? This was clearly an arrangement, right? And as part of that, you would expect a bit of, probably a bit of discretion was probably expected. At the same time, you can't sign a contract with an MP and then a future public servant and say this is contingent on that. So the Prime Minister, a bit of a sitting duck in terms of having the grievances aired. But I think it's not. I don't think it's particularly helpful. She has an outstanding record. People were concentrating on that. People were also talking about how she'd probably been a bit hard done by. I think by going sort of public with her complaints, she just sounds like any other disaffected MP who didn't quite get where they wanted to. I think that's a shame for how we remember her. in the end, the real end tomorrow at her valedictory speech, what did Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern say? That it's on a Thursday and I won't be there because that's just the pattern of my movements around the country on a Thursday.
It's true that Prime Ministers are not usually in the House on a Thursday.
That's absolutely true. It's less common for a valedictory that you really want to be at to be scheduled for the Thursday before a long weekend.
But I thought it was Louisa that had requested that she deliver her valedictory on a Thursday for that specific reason. I'm pretty sure I read that. But in terms of the role that she's been given, I mean, clearly, I think it's a tohu of the strength of her relationship with Nanaia probably as the Minister for MFAT. And while clearly it's been constructed for her, that's not to say that a role like that isn't needed in the Pacific, and I think she'll do an excellent job there.
As far as we're aware, no role yet created for Ashley Bloomfield, who is another departing servant of the public. He
full-time New Zealand sweetheart.
Still life model. I thought he is announced
for fan art of him riding a Triceratops.
Exactly. He is Director General of Health. Of course, nobody needs to be introduced to him. Annabelle, he's leaving in July. I think there's been a few other senior departures in the Ministry of Health. How would you sum up his contribution over the last few years?
The response to COVID wasn't perfect, but certainly probably one of the best in the world. I think he saved tens of thousands of lives, thousands of Māori lives. I think he'll be remembered as one of our top serving public servants. I think it reflects badly on Andrew Little as the Minister of Health that he hasn't been able to retain Ashley. I think that it shows that in terms of the change to the New Zealand Health Authority, is that what we're calling it? And
Health NZ
and the Māori Health Authority, that they either hadn't considered or hadn't wanted to create a position for him in there, because essentially it'll be like the Ministry of Health will become like TPK, really, won't it? Like basically a sort of policy.
It'll be a shrunken outfit. Yeah. It'll have a public health agency within it, but it'll be shrunken and lose some of its commissioning role.
Yeah. So obviously not probably that appealing or exciting.
I think for him. I think on a personal level, if you just face that level of, this is total conjecture, but if you've been through that incredible COVID experience and then you look up and there's this massive restructure where you have to go to 5,000 million meetings in order to deal with people all of whose roles are changing, all of who need to renegotiate, you just think, fuck that.
I do think too that possibly after the whole David Clark incident where David was mean to Ashley on stage and then Ashley like a flutter of a sad face, and then New Zealand was like outraged and ready to kill that people had hurt Ashley's feelings. Yeah. I reckon that might have spooked the government a little bit.
Well, no,
hang on, what the hell?
I think there's something to that in the government. And this is an analogy. I'm not calling him a monster, but the government did sort of create a bit of a monster with Bloomfield in the sense that, he was this very reassuring figure. He was a doctor, he was a public health expert at exactly the right time to have that sort of person as the head of the Ministry of Health. Ministry of Health is not an operational agency, and they were forced into that role because of COVID.
Yeah.
And plenty of mistakes were made, in terms of the border testing, in terms of PPE supplies, a whole lot of operational, missteps, as you might expect, when you're sort of, running to stand still.
There's a lot of steps. There's always going to be a few missteps. A lot of steps.
You're doing 25,000 a day on your
It's just the law of step statistics.
Yeah.
But in a way, I think the discussion about, what's Ashley Bloomfield's legacy is sort of the wrong one, in the sense that the COVID response is the responsibility of the government. Officials are there to provide advice, to, There's some operational sort of capacity under the pandemic legislation, but essentially you're serving the government, you're advising them, and then you're implementing their policy. We shouldn't be, if you don't implement the policy correctly. David Clark was right when the border testing failures happened. Technically, that was Ashley Bloomfield's wheelhouse because it was an operational matter. But that doesn't matter because as the minister, David Clark is responsible for that.
That's right.
If Ashley Bloomfield's not doing it, why isn't he doing it? And then you land at the Minister of Health's desk again. And we've really, that line got very blurred during the pandemic. We would, he would be up on the podium, the Prime Minister would be deferring, she would announce all of her, things saying, we have accepted, the Director General's advice, or according to the Director General's advice, we are doing this. When actually, if you're the government, you say we're doing this. We got advice on a bunch of different things, and we're doing this.
Doesn't matter. Why does that matter?
Well, the reason it matters is because I think that in the end we started thinking that this was Ashley Bloomfield's response to COVID-19, and it's not. The government, I think, was perfectly willing to sort of, because they said we're guided by, we're just following the evidence, we're following the science, we're following the advice. Now, they were rolling that out in all sorts of, economic areas, social areas, things which actually aren't, health questions. They're not Bloomfield's expertise. There's no reason you would follow Ashley Bloomfield's advice on economic matters. And in fact, he didn't tender it, right? But it was convenient for the government to say, we are following the advice of the good doctor here, the reassuring, calm man, standing next to me on the podium while I answer questions about the National Party and its leadership, and which is really a very uncomfortable place for an official to be.
I think that's true that occasionally some of those lines did blur. I think that's a fair point. At the same time, I think what you have to credit Bloomfield with was being the expert on that podium who was able to explain in very clear, accessible and authoritative, but also kind of gentle terms, the reality of the crisis that we were facing, the health crisis.
Yeah.
And if you look around the world at equivalent figures, some of them are more the public health people rather than he was the Director General of Health, and look at some of the Directors General of Health perhaps that we've had in the past, I feel like we were pretty fortunate to have someone who who certainly wasn't expecting to take that role. I don't think he invited it. Did he relish? I don't think he did particularly, but I think he was very generous with his his personality and with his intelligence.
Yeah, I think when taking away all of the tikanga around, government and who does what and all of that stuff, when you come back to the fact that we were a team of 5 million facing something that we'd never seen in our lifetime, and people were scared and confused and unsure, and no one knew what was going to happen and what was going to play out. He was an incredibly reassuring presence throughout, over the last 2 years. And I don't think we should be quick to dismiss that or undervalue how important that was, to have someone who could break things down, as you say, Tobe, very simply, and make us feel, as individuals, as families, that we were going to be okay if we followed this very simple advice, making us feel like we were going to get through it okay, and created a sense of social cohesion during that time.
We are almost done. Before we go, just a word on Moana Jackson, who died since the last time we podcast, and he, a legal scholar, a public intellectual, a mentor to many. Annabelle, you probably had a bit to do with Moana Jackson. I interviewed him a couple of times and was always struck by how generous he was in terms of his time. And one of the things that I think about just having had various conversations with him is that there's something about obviously an incredible brain, an incredible knowledge of law and history and everything else. But how some people talk about humor as being a device where you kind of, when you get people laughing, you can stick the nourishing things in. I sort of felt with him in a way. He wasn't a comedian at all, but there was something so almost soothing about the way he would talk and convey information that he would sort of, you never felt like you were being lectured to. You felt like almost like you were being, I don't know, massaged or something. There was something about, I'd be interested to know what your thoughts are about his contribution and also just his character.
There's a saying in Te Ao Māori, he kōtuku re rangatahi, a kōtuku of a single flight, which, speaks to the unique qualities of a certain leader, the specialness of a certain leader, I guess what you'd call a once-in-a-generation kind of leader. And it's a phrase that's probably overused, but in my mind, Moana Jackson is really the embodiment of that whakatauki, he kōtuku re rangatahi. He was such a special man with such unique qualities. His formidable intellect, his gentle approach, the way he could bring people into the fold, is patriot the right word? He was a true patriot of Aotearoa. He envisaged a better nation for all of us, and like you say, Tobe, just so incredibly generous with his time and his aroha, and I mean, it really breaks my heart that as this debate starts to ramp up about co-governance and what it means, that we've lost Moana. Like, we need him so desperately at this moment in time, and we are all poorer in Aotearoa for having lost him. But man, weren't we lucky to have him in the first place?
And his legacy lived on in a way even at his tangi. He had requested that women speak on the pai, and it just sort of in a way sums up his contributions living on.
Yeah, and to me it kind of speaks about, about these issues, about these interesting issues that really have to be debated amongst us as Māori. It's not for the Judith Collins of the world to tell us what we should be doing on our marae, and it's not that that Māori aren't already having these discussions amongst ourselves. And I just thought, as someone who's like such an awesome friend to wahine and mentored so many incredible wahine, it was, exactly the sort of thing that Moana would do, that he would create space for wahine to share their whakaaro and their stories about him. And some of the kōrero was so beautiful. My tuakana, Tina Whitcliffe, got up and spoke on behalf of her mum, who is a remarkable Māori Land Court judge, and her kōrero was just so beautiful. And, again, these are important discussions, but they have to be had amongst Māori, although I did see on Twitter Judith Collins kind of jumped on the bandwagon and was trying to ramp it up, and a few people came back to her. But, when she enters those conversations, it's kind of like saying, well, would you, if you're so pro-Māori women speaking, is the National Party prepared to give up some of their speaking spots in Parliament next week and make way for these women? No, of course not, because that's the tikanga of Parliament.
On our marae, on the mental health report.
But on our marae, we have our own tikanga, just like Parliament has its own. And if we change it, that has to be a discussion amongst us as Māori, not for outsiders.
Thank you, Annabelle. Thank you, Ben. Thank you, Te Ahe. Thank you, beloved listeners of Gone by Lunchtime. We will return soon.
Kia ora, I'm Alex Casey, Senior Writer at The Spinoff. We wouldn't exist without the ongoing support of our generous members. If you're able to, you can make a donation at thespinoff.co.nz/donate.
Kia ora e te iwi, Te Aihe Butler here, Podcast Manager at The Spinoff. If you enjoy listening to our podcasts, consider supporting our mahi by signing up to become a Spinoff member at thespinoff.co.nz/donate. The Spinoff Podcast Network.